Hello everyone and welcome back to my game development series. As promised last week, today we're gonna have a look at the conversation system. I also refer to it as the dialogue system. In devlog number 2, I talked about how I want to have dynamic dialogue based on certain parameters. I would highly recommend you go watch that video if you haven't seen it yet. So I had to come up with a system that would allow me to define these kind of dynamic dialogues, and I could have made some really complex thing with nodes that you can connect and whatever, but in the end I settled on defining everything in an Excel spreadsheet. The reason for that is that I am a programmer and I love text-based stuff, and in the end when you're writing dialogue, you're writing text anyways. What's also interesting about an Excel spreadsheet is that you can export it to all sorts of different things. For example, when I have to go record these lines of dialogue, I can just print out a list of every line of dialogue. When I want to translate lines of dialogue, I can just export a list, send it off to someone who can translate it, they get it back to me, and I'm ready to put it in the game. You're probably wondering what that spreadsheet looks like, so let's have a look at it. This is a spreadsheet for the conversation I discussed at the end of devlog number 2. The first line are just the headers for every single column, and every consecutive line is a line of dialogue. For now, let's just focus on this part. The speaker defines who is saying a line of dialogue, and the listener defines who is listening to that line of dialogue. The reason why I want to have both speaker and listener information is because I've got a system that automatically lets characters that are listening to a line of dialogue look at the character who is saying that line of dialogue. And then here we've got the text of that actual line of dialogue, which we also load into the game to display subtitles. If you're reading through this conversation from top to bottom, you probably notice that it doesn't make too much sense. And that is because you shouldn't actually be reading through this from top to bottom. Instead, we'll first have to discuss what this here is all about. So conversation always starts playing at the first line of dialogue, and once it's played through, we continue to a part that is specified in the next column. So once this line played through, we continue to the part reaction. There are two parts that have reaction in their name, so which one do we pick? For that, we're gonna have to look at the rules. Rules define when a part should be played. For example, this reaction should be played when the flashlight is on, and this reaction should be played when the flashlight is off. Rules are just variables which we can pass from the code into the conversation system, and then the conversation system will play the part of which the rules evaluate to true. Let's say the flashlight is on, in that case, this would be the next line of dialogue. Now, what line should we play next? Well, there is no next part defined over here, but we can just continue to the next line. Once this line played through, we won't continue to the next line because the next line has a part defined, so this is the end of the conversation. In case the flashlight would have been turned off, we would play this reaction, and then after that line of dialogue has been said, the conversation would also end. There are some other cool features that I want to demonstrate, and to do that I'm just gonna add another line of dialogue. I also gave it the name reaction for its part. As you can see, I've left the rules empty, which means they will always evaluate to true. Now we've got a problem, however, because what if the flashlight is turned on? Then this line of dialogue will actually be perfectly valid to play, but also this line of dialogue will be perfectly valid because the rules always evaluate to true. In this case, we pick the line of dialogue that has the most rules and is therefore the most specific. However, let's say I also add a rule to this line of dialogue. Which one do we pick now? Well, in this case we just treat this as a random choice, which is kind of a useful feature in case we want random lines of dialogue to play. Finally, we're also not limited to only adding one rule. We can add multiple rules to a single part just by separating them with a comma. Also, we don't have to use the equal sign always. We could perfectly use some kind of other sign. For example, if rule is less than equal to 1 and if flashlight equals 1, then this line of dialogue should get played. There's one last thing here, which is this delay column. By default, we always add a small delay between lines of dialogue, but if we really wanted to, we could add a bigger delay, let's say 0.5 seconds, before this line of dialogue gets said. Alright, so now that we've got all of our dialogue for a specific conversation in an Excel spreadsheet, what's next? Well, of course, we've got to record the lines of dialogue, and I just number them from 0 to however many lines of dialogue there are in the conversation. I store those files in a folder together with the Excel spreadsheet, and then I import the Excel spreadsheet into Unity. In Unity, I've written a piece of code that takes the spreadsheet and converts it into a format that the game can actually work with. It will also go look for the audio files and automatically import them. We can then play through the entire conversation as discussed in last week's video. If you want to get access to the source code of this system, then consider becoming a patron on patreon.com/floatymonkey. Next week's video is gonna be a bit different. It's also not gonna be uploaded on Friday, but probably on Saturday or Sunday. If you don't want to miss that video, then make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon. If you enjoyed this video, then please give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.